Have you ever had that piece of media, like a film or TV show, that people keep talking to you about? They keep saying how good it is, and you know that they're probably right, but for some reason, you don't find the time to watch it? Like, there's no reason to believe that it's going to be bad or a disappointing watch, but it just never comes to mind when you're trying to think of something to watch next. For a long time, well, at least the majority of this past decade, that has been how Sword of the Stranger was for me. Sword of the Stranger is a semi-historical action drama film released in 2007 by Studio Bones. It is based off of no pre-existing material at all, and it got royally screwed upon its Western release, which led to very few people over here knowing that it even existed. It was mostly recommended over here by word of mouth, which I wouldn't have thought would have been much of an issue considering it's Studio Bones. You know, that's Studio Bones! 2007 was the time after their massive success with Fullmetal Alchemist in 2003, Ouran High School Host Club, and Darker Than Black. They were coming into their own, but still making waves with fans out here in the West. And yet, this wonderfully animated film went relatively unnoticed. This is a film not necessarily about breaking new ground in narratives or storytelling, but largely about making a visual spectacle that let the animators stretch their legs a bit. It allowed them to show off what they were really capable of and to make a wholly solid production at the same time. To explain more about the film and potentially change the tide in the film's favor, ladies, gentlemen, and others, today I give you Sword of the Stranger and why it is a must-watch. Before we can get into the truly great parts of this film, it's probably best to first introduce the more mild or somewhat bland aspects of the film. Narratively speaking, Sword of the Stranger is a fairly common lone samurai story, or if those aren't common to you, it's like a typical Western, just with samurai instead of cowboys. Taking place in Japan's Sengoku period, a group of skilled Chinese mercenaries and delegates are sent to the island of Japan by the emperor, and they go there with orders to capture a young boy. The boy, Kotaro, while fleeing, ends up bumping into a lone samurai ronin, Nanashi. After getting himself wrapped up in the situation following a Chinese ambush, Nanashi agrees to escort Kotaro to a nearby monastery where he will be safe. So far, so good. Young, slightly annoying kid protagonist finds outlaw-type action badass with mysterious origins. Time to go on a road trip! Road trip! Without spoiling too much of the plot, the majority of the narrative revolves around not only why the Chinese are after Kotaro in the first place, but also the fact that the film surprisingly has enough time to develop the characters as they travel. And not just the main characters either, but also the villains and the Japanese locals who aren't too pleased about these foreigners traipsing across their land. We get to see an interesting outlook as the myriad of power struggles come to a head. We've got the loyalists from China who would die for their emperor, and some of their subordinates who are less cultishly loyal. There's the local shogun who doesn't worry about much and seems to care about even less, plus his general who is becoming more irritated by the foreigners with each passing scene. All the while, Kotaro is just trying to keep himself and his dog alive, attempting to guilt this powerful swordsman into helping him, and when that doesn't work, bribing him. We don't necessarily get to understand Nanashi's reasons for helping, but we almost don't need to. It's implied, and by I mean that explicitly stated in front of a campfire, that he's had a fairly dark past and feels the need for some kind of redemption. And as if by providence, the world has given him that chance by allowing him to try and protect this boy and his dog. While it is true that much of the overall meat of the story is not something wholly unique to, just this film, what it offers, like the character interactions over the course of it, really gives it a kind of spice to keep the whole thing from feeling overly bland and repetitive to those already familiar with this kind of story. Of course, the real reason why you want to watch Sword of the Stranger is for the cuts of animation. That's a clever way to refer to the animation, which mostly consists of people trying to slice each other to death with swords. This is to say that the film is quite a bit of a gory affair. Even from the film's initial intro, not only is the choreography done with stunning detail, but the blood and effects are striking. So Come prepared if you're a little bit squeamish. But me, hey, I grew up with freaking Miyazaki and having people's arms get cut off with a bow and arrow, so, you know, you get used to it. The intro also thankfully sets up a lot of your expectations for the animation in the film. It's basically the second best action scene in the whole film, barring the finale. So even if the narrative doesn't get its hooks into you at the start, the gorgeous visuals hopefully will. I say this even now in the year of 2020, when the stunning effect of this animation has dimmed slightly compared to when the film was first released. Because if we were to compare it to some of the best cuts of today, it might fall flat. But when you consider that it's 13 years old, that impressiveness starts to come back. There are three big names that I want to bring up in relation to this. Firstly, Hidetsugu Ito. And that's probably a name you don't recognize. One, because I may have butchered it, but also because looking at the work that he's been involved with, he mostly sticks to key animating theatrical films. He is one of the reasons why many shonen anime series can have middling animation for much of their television run, only for a theatrical film to come out and blow it all out of the water. Fitting, considering just how good with water he is. Not just in his portfolio, but here in this film too, where you have entire scenes that take place in the rain. Next, there's the director of the film, Masashiro Ando, a name that has a bit more recognition behind it, mostly because of this film, as it was his directorial debut. A key animator himself by trade, Ando made a name for himself on some of the bigger films of the 90s and early 2000s. He was a key animator in the original Ghost in the Shell, Pat Labor 2, and the Bebop movie. One of Ando's strengths as both a director and an animator is that he knows how action works in animation. Much of the action for Sword of the Stranger wasn't based off any existing choreography, and instead relied on the artist's individual imaginations in order to be brought to life. To be able to understand that and to drive it forward is a skill that Ando had in spades. Bones as a studio is very much known for their action scenes, and even with some popular non-action shows to their name, to be able to corral that talent into one project took someone who needed to know how all of the animators worked together well. And lastly, I can't talk about the names behind the animation of this film without mentioning one final name: Yutaka Nakamura. You might not know his name, but if you've been watching anime for any decent length of time, specifically any major Bones anime for like the last 20 years, you've seen his work. Nakamura is almost like Bones' pinch hitter of a sort. Some of my favorite cuts of animation from this company's history were done by Nakamura, and if they need a moment in a show to be really done well, likely his name is attached to it. For Sword of the Stranger, Nakamura was in charge of the final fight scene of the film. The sword play between two masters of the art that takes place on top of a makeshift building that is falling apart. If you watch this film thinking that some of the animation doesn't necessarily look impressive compared to modern day, then this is the scene that's going to change your mind. The angles, the direction of the movement, the impact of each sword swing is masterful. And honestly, the whole film is worth watching just to get to that point, to see that scene in context. What I would have given to have been able to watch that scene in theaters. Which is where some of this film's hidden nature in the West comes to light. Technically, this film did have a theatrical release, just not a very good one. 2 years after debuting in Japan, Bandai USA picked up the film for distribution in North America. They charged Vancouver-based Ocean Studios with the task of producing a dub, and had a one-night-only screening of the film in around 350 US theaters in February of 2009. Marketing, however, was not particularly a strong suit, and because the film wasn't directly tied to any existing franchise, it's not like Bandai could have just tapped into any fan base. As far as I can tell, while the film may have done somewhat well on that one singular night, everything else was just left alone. Following the theatrical run, the film was dumped to DVD later that year and was kind of left to be forgotten, and so it was. Bandai kept a tight hold on the film's rights, but largely its presence within the anime fandom in the West was due to word of mouth. You picked it up and you watched it because someone you know already did and told you how good it was. But there are obvious limits to that. Eventually, the DVDs went out of print. Why? Because Bandai decided to downsize. At the start of 2012, Bandai USA began to close its DVD distribution chains, leaving any title under that banner to become suddenly more scarce than before. So even if you had a friend who recommended the film, unless they happen to have a copy to lend you, or you began to sail the high seas of the internet. Actually watching the film was out of your reach. By the time that Funimation was finally able to grab the rights to it back in 2016, it became more of a too little, too late situation. It's like trying to get people to watch classic anime films like Akira or Ghost in the Shell, just without the same kind of historical fame that those films have as classics here in the West. So those who have heard of the film and have watched it speak of it highly, while those who haven't, well, now we're back to the situation that I started with. One where, yeah, you heard it's good, and you're sure you're gonna watch it. Eventually, one day, sometime soon. So this is me telling you to watch this film. Ideally on Blu-ray, but in a pinch, the streaming options work well. Though for whatever reason, Funimation has only the dub available for streaming. Not entirely sure why. If I haven't yet gotten across the good reasons to watch the film, then allow me to summarize. First, it has a decent plot that combines one samurai's redemption with the honor and downfall of others, alongside the local politics that interfere with the situation both for profit and for loyalty. Second, it is animated by some of the best in the business, with high points that still rival animation of today. And third, which is potentially the most important, this film has the bestest doggo. While the child character can be annoying and unreasonable at times, his dog, Kotomaru, is not. He is an extremely loyal pup and knows how to make the best of every situation. For Sword of the Stranger, if you don't watch it for its amazing cuts of animation or the history baked into it, then the best reason I can give is that this devoted dog is what makes the film a must-watch. Which brings us to the end of the video. And we are slowly making our way through a bunch of anime that I haven't talked about, that I haven't seen many other people talk about, but you know, you should. I've already had people questioning my choice of name for this series, must-watch anime. Yes, like Chihaya Furu and Sword of the Stranger are must-watches. Well, I think that they are, especially now that we live in a time where a lot of us have nothing but time on our hands. It is one of those films that is really good that no one talks about, but that's just how it is with anime films, actually, I feel like. We don't talk about them, except like when they've gotten really big. Like, things have changed in recent years. Premiere was freaking huge, but like Sword of the Stranger and like even Redline, people don't talk about as much anymore, and people should watch Redline. Redline's great, or at least the first 8 minutes of Redline is great. But enough of that, and I should be really wrapping this film up. As far as streaming goes, it is available currently from Funimation, as I mentioned earlier in the video. And again, I'm just gonna restate how very odd I found it that the dub was the only thing available. It's not that the dub is bad per se. It's just a little awkward when you have characters who are Chinese that speak, I believe it is Mandarin, and then speak Japanese, which is translated in the dub to English. And you can tell that the voices are not the same people, and there is a bit of a disconnect with some of the characters. Other than that, the dub is perfectly serviceable. But like, if you can get it on physical, and you can actually watch it in Blu-ray, in Japanese, it's probably the best way to go. As far as what's going on next for the channel, I don't know, because all of my plans have been horribly combobulated. I don't even know if that's the right word. I'm probably still going to be having a spring wrap-up video because I've had nothing but time to catch up on everything from this season, so we're going to be talking about that in the next week or so, and beyond that, we're going to see how it goes. We're going to play it by ear, and that's the best I can promise. But that's kind of how everybody is going, but we're gonna do our best to keep everything moving, and with luck, everything will turn out fine. So a big thank you to all of my patrons who continually make these videos possible. You guys are great. I do want to state pretty much flat out that if you are a patron and for whatever reason you do not feel like you have the money currently due to the current world situation, feel free to cancel. I do not care. I would really much rather you guys take care of yourselves and make sure that you're all fine and everything's cool, because I want you guys to take care of yourselves. So please do that. But for those who have donated through Patreon, thank you very much. Specifically, a special shout out to patrons Calhoun Boy, Phoenix Zero, Hector Montemayor, Richard Emile Bradley, Rune Jacobson, Ryfen Bonaparte, and Siri Yamako for being especially awesome. You guys are great. But take care of yourselves, everyone. Please, seriously. I'd end this video just by saying wash your hands, but I know everybody already does that, so I'll aim it with the second piece of advice. Wash your phones. I don't know why people haven't been saying wash your phones. You hold your phone in your hand. You play with it in your hands all the time. The only thing it really touches is your hands and whatever surfaces you leave it on. So please wash your phones. Wash your phones. Just be careful in and around the parts that have, like, the inside bits. Just be careful in and around the parts that have inside bits, so like where you plug it in, and if you happen to have an audio jack, which my phone doesn't have, just be careful not to get too much water or anything in there, but clean your phones. If it has a case, clean your phone cases. Be safe, everyone. And until next time, watch more anime, because we got a lot of time now, so it's a good thing to do. And of course, stay frosty.